Good morning, everyone. So we're starting the fourth session today, a session on predators, ecology, and anthropogenic interactions. We'll start this morning with Valérie, continuing with Astrid and Ocean. So you may want to know who is in your jury. I think you will see that easily. So part of the jury this morning, we have Steve Como, Louisa Mangalajo, Eric Frottinger, Aldine Amiel, joined today by Jules as an external observer. For those who can speak French, les stages en troisième. Also, so for your reviewers, in addition to Steve, Louisa, Eric, and Aldine, you also have Guillaume Leport, who has joined the group of reviewers. Here we go, Valérie, whenever you're ready, and then around 20 minutes of questions. Good for you?
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming today. I'm really excited to present to you because I get to talk about whale sharks. And whale sharks are not only the biggest shark, but also the biggest fish, and they can grow up to size as wide as this room. So they cannot be overseen. Yet, my internship with the Large Marine Vertebrate Research Institute, Philippines, most of the days looked like this. A beautiful scenery, but not a single whale shark in sight. And I'm not talking about days, I'm talking about weeks, where we were really going desperate to just see anything. And yet, suddenly they appeared again, and our faces were lit with joy and excitement. So this emotional roller coaster led me to my research question about the environmental factors influencing whale shark encounter frequency at an aggregation site in the Philippines. But to just give you a little recap about whale sharks in general, what do we know besides the immense sizes? Most of you might know that they're omnivore filter feeders, so they eat anything from algae to jellyfish, fish eggs, zooplankton, and even small schooling fish. We also know that they're, like many other elasmobranchs, considered endangered on the IUCN Red List due to several threats, like bycatch, microplastic, or also illegal targeted hunting over they're protected. The fact that they're endangered is further aggravated by their complicated life history, of which we still don't know many things. For example, we only know that they're ovoviviparous and that they have a late sexual maturity, which they reach around 25 years. And they also have a highly migratory and mobile nature. As you can see on the map here, their habitat spans from warm to temperate seas and includes all oceans. In fact, we have two subpopulations, one in the Atlantic and one in the Indo-Pacific. And you might have been wondering what those red little dots are. Those are, in fact, predictable feeding aggregations. We have around 20 of them, and one of them is Honda Bay in the Philippines. The Philippines is an island nation in Southeast Asia, as you can see here, and Honda Bay specifically lies on the island of Palawan in the west of the Philippines, approximately here. It's a very shallow bay, and it's also the second largest aggregation site for whale sharks in the Philippines, with approximately 380 identified individuals. And they use it as a seasonal and opportunistic feeding and foraging site. And most of the whale sharks in the Philippines, in Honda Bay specifically, they're young juvenile male whale sharks, which only stay in the bay for around a day, so only a short period of time. We also know that there is some connectivity, like those satellite telemetry studies have shown that there's connectivity between Honda Bay and other sites in the Philippines, as well also as Malaysia, even Indonesia. And as I previously mentioned in my introduction, during the season of 2025, we've experienced high temporal variation in those encounter frequencies, which led me to my research question about examining the environmental factors influencing that. And here I wanted to look at several ones. So first, the food availability, then abiotic factors, then the weather, and lastly also the moon illumination. But first we have to collect the data. So how did we do that? We did field surveys in Honda Bay from the end of April until the end of August, and we either used those small, narrow, tiny pump boats or the slightly larger version of that, a tour boat, because they are two local whale shark tourism operators, which would give us a free spot if they had one available on that tour. And then what did we do during the surveys? We documented every event from, and that included the time of the day, the GPS location, but also environmental factors like the weather class, the estimated wind speed and also the estimated swell height. And then we still need to find those whale sharks. Well, we know that both the whale shark as well as the mackerel tuna and even some seabirds feed on the Philippine anchovy, a small schooling fish in Honda Bay. And like even from far away, you could see something like that, which we would call tuna balls and birds. You have the seabirds feeding from above on the anchovy, and the tunas from below, sometimes even jumping out of the water, feeding on that anchovy as well. And there was a high probability that we could also find a whale shark amidst that. And if we actually found a whale shark, we would get in the water to obtain a photo identification shot, because their unique spot patterns enable us to identify individuals. We would furthermore also try and get a sex identification shot, which would require us to dive underneath the whale shark to see if the shark had clusters or not. Then we would also visually estimate the size and also document the behavior as well as the compliance behavior of the humans around the whale shark. And back home, what we would do, we would use those photo identification shots to compare them with Lamado's catalog to identify individuals. So where did my I participated in the fieldwork, and what did I do after that? So firstly, I had to reorganize the data because it was a lot of data. And then I proceeded with the site characterization to see which whale sharks are actually visiting Honda Bay, and does it confirm with literature. After that, I also had a look at the temporal and spatial variation, and also the survey effort. And then I really dug into my research question, checking if there are correlations between the encounter frequency as well as the environmental survey data collected during the surveys, then the moon illumination, and lastly also satellite data. So diving right into the first part, the site characterization of Honda Bay. We had a total of 344 encounters, with an encounter sometimes being as short as a few seconds, because we would get in the water, see the whale shark would swim away instantly, and the encounter has ended. And out of those 344 encounters, we cannot even say 344 encounters equals 344 individuals, because sometimes we saw the same individual shark for multiple encounters on that day, or even in a few occasions on multiple days. So what we can say is that also those 344 encounters, 79 encounters were 34 previously identified sharks, which are called old sharks in my graph because we have identified them during previous seasons. Then furthermore, there are also 127 new sharks encounters. New sharks are sharks we could identify this season for the first time. And the ID is not completed, but it's approximately 50 individuals. But that leaves us with a big chunk of unknown ID sharks, sharks for which we could not obtain a suitable photo identification shot, which is quite a large percentage. And those uncertainties are even bigger if we have a look at the sex identification shot, because we could only obtain a suitable sex ID for less than 15%. And out of those 51 for which we could obtain a sex ID, only 2 were female and the rest were all male. And if we have a look at the size, we can see that the average estimated visual size was 4.5 meters, with a minimum of 2 meters and a maximum of 7 meters. So coming to the literature, we can say, like that was the same source I've said it earlier, we can say, yes, there are juvenile whale sharks with an average length of 4.5 meters visiting Honda Bay, but we cannot say anything about the sex, in my opinion, because with such a big margin of uncertainty, I don't think it's possible just from less than 15% to assume that most of them are male. Because, for example, what if female whale sharks are more shy than male whale sharks, which would make it more difficult to obtain a sex identification shot. And likewise, because of the high percentage of unknown whale sharks, we can also not say how many re-encounters we have had, because maybe we have re-encountered the same shark on multiple days without even knowing. So I think even saying that they only stay here for 1 day is kind of risky, in my opinion. And that is due because of the big uncertainties I've mentioned earlier. Coming to the next part, the temporal and spatial variation. Like I've already mentioned it in my hook, there was a high temporal variation. We can see some months, for example, in May, with a few encounter rates, and then like nearly nothing between June and July, and then big encounter rates in July and August. And if we have a closer look at the specific time frames, which I've colored here, we can see that especially during the beginning of July, we have 69 encounters, and in the beginning of August, 141 encounters over 9 days. So they're like ranging in different days. Some days are only, sometimes on 4 days, sometimes 9 days, but always specific time frames. And the emphasis on those two, the blue and the yellow one, is further emphasized if we have a look at the rare in-season encounters, where we had one, like the same individual, and we encountered it on multiple days within the season, which only happened for 22 encounters. They as well happened in the beginning of July and the beginning of August. And if we have a look at the spatial variation now, we can see that most of the encounters are quite densely in one area. However, we can see some variation as well. For example, the encounters in the beginning of June happened further up north than most of the other encounters. But if we want to have a look at the whale shark encounter frequency, we also have to consider having a constant survey effort. And here is where you can see our survey effort from May to August was varying. In total, we did 101 surveys, of which 60 were pump boat surveys and 41 were towboat surveys, with a minimum of 2 surveys per week and a maximum of 15 surveys per week, so sometimes up to 3 surveys a day. And if you compare that to the graph I've just shown you before, you can see it is not a coincidence that in weeks where we had more surveys, we had more whale shark encounters, because it makes sense. The more often you go out, the more likely it is to see a whale shark. But in total, like, we have to consider that we had a limited survey effort and also not a constant one. That is due to several factors. For example, one of them being financially restricted. Due to financial restrictions, we could only do a maximum of 18 pump boat surveys per month. And others, we also have to consider that the pump boat surveys and the towboat surveys have different objectives. For the pump boats, it was more about quantifying photo identification. And for the towboat surveys, the tourist operators wanted to give their customers the best experience. And sometimes that meant following the same individual whale shark for a while and having 10 encounters with the same individual, like getting in the water, getting out of the water, getting in and out again. Furthermore, the surveys are also highly weather dependent, which brings me to my next point. Because initially, I wanted to have a look if the weather conditions would correlate with whale shark encounter frequency. But then I thought again, and I thought about our little, tiny, narrow pump boats. It is quite an adventure if you have sea conditions with wave heights of more than 0.5 meters. Actually, at some point, it was also unsafe for us to go out if there was a storm. Furthermore, like those weather conditions could also affect the visibility of whale sharks, especially if they're swimming a little bit deeper in the water column. So just to give you a sum up, we had the majority of encounters being fairly calm and good conditions for sunny, not a lot of wind, not big waves. But in the end, I could not use this data because, as you could see, it was biased. However, what I could check for was the moon illumination. During the time I was there, we had 4 complete moon cycles, put into 4 phases, starting with the new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, and the third quarter. If we have a look at the encounters and the surveys, we see that it's varying for the phases. However, we can see that we definitely have more encounters in the first quarter phase, as well as also small surveys, and definitely also more encounters in the full moon phase. And the chi-square test actually showed that those are significant differences. And that could be due to multiple things. For example, the moon illumination could increase the visibility of the whale shark spray, but it could also affect the tides. However, it was not the case for every single first quarter or full moon phase that we had higher encounter frequencies. That led me to think that there must be another factor influencing the whale shark encounter frequencies. And I was hoping to find it looking at satellite data. So here I had a look at chlorophyll A concentration, the sea surface temperature, and salinity, but they all proved to be not significant. And if we have a look at literature, we can find different papers confirming or contradicting what I found out. But then we have to keep in mind that all those studies are from different regions, from different aggregation sites. We have Peru, then we have Western Australia, Tanzania, and Western Australia again. And I'm comparing it to Polar Bay in the Philippines. So I don't think it's scientifically viable to compare all those different geographic locations and how environmental factors influence presence, absence on whale sharks there with another geographic location, because it could be different. So coming back to my research question, could I actually answer it? No, I could not give a definitive answer. I've seen that the moon phases seems to be significant, but are probably not the only factor influencing absent whale shark encounter frequency. However, we've seen that Honda Bay seems to be a seasonal opportunistic feeding and foraging ground for juvenile whale sharks. Male or female, that's still unclear. And if we come back to the beginning, I've showed you that there is a satellite telemetry study which showed the connectivity to other sites. Also, if you keep in mind that whale sharks in Honda Bay might only stay for a short amount of time, we could think that maybe Honda Bay's primary function lies in being as a navigational waypoint, and only secondary as a feeding and foraging ground. And in that sense, it would make, or in that way, it would make more sense to have a look at the environmental conditions affecting absence and presence of whale sharks at the connecting sites, instead at Honda Bay specifically. But that would require further research, especially more satellite telemetry studies, and also an improved data collection in Honda Bay to see how long the whale sharks are really sticking around. So coming back to my title, Understanding the Giants of the Ocean is really about more than just statistical tests. It's about having a look at the bigger picture and also thinking about more possibilities, how it could be. And it's also about international collaboration on research and management to really be able to protect the species. On that, I would like to end, and here are my references. And then thank you for listening.
Great. Let's open the floor to questions. Jules? No, I'm kidding. I will invite Jules to ask a couple of questions, and if we have time, we can come back.
Okay. So thank you for this nice presentation and to make us travel a lot. So did you observe other shark species around, or other big species when you see them?
Or something else.
Something else that can give you some sign for your research.
So it was most often on the days where we did not see any sharks that we observed other things, maybe because we had more time, or we were just desperate to see anything. It was more often mostly bottlenose dolphins and spinner dolphins in varying group sizes, sometimes 2, sometimes I think up to 80. But I think that maybe overall it happened like when I was there for the I think it maybe has happened around 15 times. And then turtles, probably green turtles. And one time we also saw a glimpse of a dugong. I think, okay, one of us saw a glimpse of a dugong diving down. And I was not on that survey, but one of us has also seen a zebra shark swimming at the surface. But I was not there.
Okay, and all these species, do you think that all these species can give you some insight for your project?
To some extent, I think it shows more, maybe not to my project, but I think it shows or it emphasizes the importance of Honda Bay as a hotspot for biodiversity. But I think not necessarily to the project, because I have not read anything. I mean, for that, we would have to check if there's a correlation. If like more dolphins means more whale sharks. But I haven't read it, couldn't find anything about that in the literature.
Okay, thank you. I'm fine.
Can continue. Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have 2 questions. One is very technical. Why were the photos for the shark ID and the sex ID not conclusive? Part of it you showed that you couldn't conclude on the shark ID or on the sex or on the gender. So why is that? Because the images were unsharp? Because other reasons, too far away?
Yes. So there are a few reasons for both the ID and the sex. It was often the case that the shark was swimming fast, or probably the shark was not swimming fast for the shark itself, but for us it was swimming quite fast. Sometimes they also instantly dove, and like it's subjective, but we sometimes also thought they were avoiding us. And like because of our presence that they would swim away quite fast. And with the And so Parma with the photo identification, like we really need to, like we had to, can go back.
The lateral image.
Yeah, for us it was really important to get to be able to compare those photo identification shots that really got it on the right angle, like on the same height as the shark, which was sometimes difficult because you had to dive down and also not too far behind, not too far in front. And then also water quality could also impact the suitability of pictures or light. If it was too dark, we could not identify all the necessary spots. So those were definitely limiting factors. And as I said, like for the sector, it was really like the challenge of being able to match the speed of the shark and then diving underneath the shark while not getting too close. So it was making it quite tricky.
Plenty of other questions. I may follow up on this later. The second question is linked to the observation that the moon phase might be associated to the encounter frequency. So I was wondering what is known about coral spawning events at the same time, because well, coral eggs, larvae are very rich in proteins, which might be part of the food. Is there any correlation that you may see as well?
Like I've read in other papers that they connect, for example, events like coral spawning with an increased whale shark presence, and that also with moon illumination. However, I don't think, since the whale sharks are feeding on the Philippine anchovy in Honda Bay, I don't think it might be the case for this geographic site. As I said, like it's about the different aggregation sites, so it's really difficult to some extent to compare those studies. But I've definitely read about the coral spawning also being an influence because it's food. So
okay, thank you.
Luisa, do you want to continue?
A curiosity. What time of the day, during the day, you did the encounters, or at the end of the day, at the very beginning? Which part of the day?
I think on the days where we had encounters, on the days where we had encounters, they were mostly like they're starting quite early, sometimes up to 8. We would be on the water by 7 a.m. And then sometimes the encounter started up to 8 a.m. and kept going until 2 p.m. But then we already had to go back because we already spent 6 hours. More than 6 hours on water. So
you think that during the night, what is their major activity? Encounters would be the same? It's feeding more during the night or the day, to your opinion?
Like I know they haven't done that in Honda Bay, like any studies about that. But I know from other sites again, which we have to take with a grain of salt because it could be different. I think some other sites say, or some other studies say that they are diving a lot during the day, but not at night. Because maybe I can imagine that it might be the case if we have, like, for example, like all the little zooplankton going up at the night during the day to the surface. No, during the night to the surface. Sorry. Then it would make sense for the whale sharks also to be at the surface. And then, like during the day, they would go for foraging dives in the deep. But then, as I said, also Honda Bay is not as deep. I think maximum 200 meters. Definitely less in most of the parts. So it doesn't really make sense for them to go down in the deep.
And I was also interested about the type of boat. Do you think that there is an influence on the noise, for example, of the boat, or the type of boat, the number of tourists? Or maybe they recognize when a boat is just 3 people or 100 trying to swim. And so what is your feeling about this? And the other question is, what would you improve eventually in the monitoring, in the data collection, to try to, because there are, of course, as for all megafauna bias of, for example, it would be nice to also make encounters during the night, but what do you think could be improved?
Okay, coming to the improvements, I can show you my dynamics. There we go. I have a few different ideas, which are, because Lamave is an NGO, they don't have the most financial capacities. So I thought about, like, with less cost and effort, what would help me for the data organization would be, there's a difficulty in organizing the data in encounters and in individuals. I think that would be good to find a way where we can have both, because now the data was only organized in encounters, which is also difficult because we did have a lot of unidentified sharks. And then, as you mentioned, that also connects to your other question with the anthropogenic pressures. We did, when we had a shark encounter, we would sample how much anthropogenic pressure was around. For example, you would see how many people are underwater with the shark, and are they closer than 4 meters or farther away than 4 meters, and how many boats, doesn't matter if we counted fishing boats as well as other boats, like tour boats, are in the vicinity of the shark. And I think the threshold here was below 20 meters or more than 20 meters. So we did that. And I think depending on the behavior of the tourists, and sometimes I think also the shark showed more or less avoidant behavior. Some sharks did not care. I think we had one which even bumped into our boat because I think he was blind. But there were also sharks which definitely showed avoidant behavior. And I think it's probably due to humans. Like sometimes with the tour boats, there were up to 30 people in the water at the same time, with people being quite close to the shark as well, and some people even nearly jumping on the shark, which is definitely not compliant, and which I should have not have done. But we only had limited say with it because the tour operators are offering us free seat, and I guess they don't want us shying away the tourists, telling them no. And yes, but we did not sample the anthropogenic pressure when there were no whale sharks, which would have been interesting because then we could have correlated, okay, less boats in the area, maybe it does mean more sharks, or maybe it does mean less sharks, or more boats, vice versa. That would have been interesting for that. And then I thought about more costly and more ideas which would require more effort. I know in Western Australia, for the whale shark tourism, they use airplanes to find the whale sharks. Of course, it will be very, very costly for the Philippines. But I was thinking maybe aerial drones could help spot whale sharks, observe the behavior without ever having a human in the water, and also maybe help position the boat in a better way so that the boat could drop the researchers in a better position, which gives them more chances to obtain a good photo identification or even a sex ID. Of course, drones are weather dependent as well. If there's too much wind, we can't operate them. And it could also help measure the size better if we have a picture from above. Furthermore, I would also suggest regular plankton sampling because I only had very limited satellite data. There was not a big spatial resolution as well as temporal resolution, and they do not do regular sampling of the zooplankton on the bay. Yes, I've mentioned the extension on the satellite telemetry studies because of the one I've shown.
I'll invite you to finish your answer.
Yeah.
With the one I've shown, they only could track 5 whale sharks. Yeah, and maybe what I was thinking with the bad weather, when we had to go back back home because it was too rough for us, most of the fishermen would still go out fishing, and actually the fishermen are really, really good at spotting the whale sharks. So I was thinking it would be interesting or a cool idea to set up an app where they could track whale shark whale shark sightings they have. Yes.
Yeah, I will invite you to shorten your answers to have more questions like with Steven.
Yes. I was wondering for your satellite data, you say you didn't have a correlation between shark encounters and chlorophyll A, for example. But why do you think is important the concentration of chlorophyll A at a given time at this spot? Is it this spot compared to a larger area? Maybe it's a bit higher there than somewhere else. Or is it the chlorophyll A maybe a few weeks before, and that then will correspond to more anchovies later on? So how did you deal with that, or did you just simply look at chlorophyll A at a given point, given time, and compare this to your shark encounter? A bit more information on that.
Yes. That's what I actually did. I looked at the chlorophyll A concentration for that given day and how many shark encounters we had on that day. And I get your point. There could be some temporal delay. Also because if we think, okay, the chlorophyll A belongs to the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton is eaten by the zooplankton, and the zooplankton is eaten by the Philippine anchovy. So there's quite some delay. However, I could not find anything in literature saying anything about the time, how long it takes.
Yeah. And then do you have information on the anchovies that every day, data from the fishermen and
No.
gender?
No. Like it's Honda Bay is very rural, and like most of the fishermen go out there with very basic equipment. So I could not get any data from that. I don't even think there is existing data because the fishermen mostly target the mackerel tuna, which I've showed earlier, and not those small Philippine anchovies.
Yeah.
And there's also like I've tried to look up Philippine anchovy on the internet with find any scientific sources, but there were also none specifically about them in Honda Bay. So. Like the chlorophyll A might be not the best proxy for food availability. It's something I'm sure of.
Okay, thank you.
Coming back to you, Tim. No questions?
One more question. Did you started to look at seismic activity in this zone and just to check if there is any correlation with this encounter? Because when there is this seismic activity, and it's the place of the world where there is a lot, I think. So you have a lot of fish from the depths, from the abyss that pop up. So do you think that it can bring them to go to the surface, and you can see them better?
Mm-hmm. That's actually a good point because I did not check that. I haven't read anything about a seismic like the previous studies I've read. I haven't read anything about seismic activity here, but it would definitely be interesting to see if it has an effect. But like also like as I said, like seismic activities were not mentioned in previous studies, so I don't know anything about if it has an effect. But it would be interesting to explore. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if any of the jury wants to ask a last question and open the floor to.
May I have a very quick one? So you said that there seems to be a gender bias in the sort of encounters that you couldn't really confirm because of the salmon sites. Is there any idea why this is the case?
Mm-hmm. So it's the fact that like most studies say that the coastal aggregations are mainly male-dominated, which still does not mean that every coastal aggregation is male-dominated. And those studies saying that thought that maybe 1 second. Okay. Maybe like there's still like a lot of unclarity about the whereabouts of females. Doesn't matter if juveniles or even adults sometimes. They think it could be because of some studies mentioned harassment. So I think that might have been the reason that females stay somewhere else.
Okay, thanks.
A couple of questions from you. Starting with Amy.
The period where there was not much survey effort, was that just due to the weather, like the whole season in which you didn't have any survey efforts? Was that like mainly the weather that did
It
it?
was the weather on one side, but also on the other side, as I said, like with the limited number of pump boat surveys per week, we had to, or they had to space out the surveys somewhat evenly. So because if we go out 3 times, like 3 times in a row without seeing anything, and then we're not able to sample the next days, and maybe we would have seen something, that's also a reason why. So we were on one side and not seeing anything on the other side, which led us to have more days in between the surveys.
I was curious how you use the satellite telemetry data. Like, how is it like time points that you correlate then with the encounters, or?
Yes. So I had to. The satellite data is unfortunately due to the lack of suitable data not very accurate. Actually, I went onto a Copernicus site and tried to get a point as close as possible within my encounter range. And then I compared the time points, as you said, for salinity, chlorophyll.
But no, I mean the telemetry, so like the tracking.
No, so I did not do the telemetry tracking. That was from a previous study done at Honda Bay, but I think from 2017, I only read the paper.
Okay, it was just that picture.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're good. Congratulations again. Valérie? So we can go to Astrid. Astrid, if you're ready. Here we go.
Okay, so I want to ask the room, who here has ever been diving with sharks? Okay, and for those who haven't, there are some certain rules that you have to follow when you encounter sharks. And this is kind of a part of my presentation today, which is about the effect of human marine activity like scuba diving on sharks and their abundance aggregation patterns. And why do I want to talk about that? It's because it is getting really important. There's the rise of marine ecotourism, and the global diving community has grown rapidly. That means like over 500,000 of divers seek shark encounters every year. And in South Africa, shark-based tourism is generating a lot of income a year with like 4.4 million US dollars. And ecotourism is a significant economic contributor, and ecotourism can be good for conservation, but it can also affect the sharks, their abundance patterns. And this is the shark species that I would like to talk about more. So some people may have heard of them. In the US, they call it the sand tiger shark, even though it's not a tiger shark. And in Australia, they call it a grey nurse shark, even though it's not a nurse shark. I will be referring to it solely as a reggae-tooth shark, as they call it in South Africa. And the scientific name is Castorius taurus. And it was the first shark that was actually in the world like specified as endangered. It is critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. And that is because it has a very slow life history. It has like a low maturity and fecundity. So it has a biannual reproductive cycle, which means that the females only reproduce every 2 years with only one pup per uterus. They have two. So that's only 2 pups per every 2 years. So they are really sensitive, and they have a strong site fidelity to specific reefs, which means that they like return to the same reef again and again. And because of that, they have really low resilience to disturbance or displacement. And where exactly was my study area? It was in Setswana Bay in South Africa. It is in the ECOLOGY Wetland Park. It is one of the biggest marine protected areas in South Africa, and a very beloved dive site because there's a lot of sharks and biodiversity. It is a cultural heritage of UNESCO. And I talked about the site fidelity, and there are 2 sites where these reggae-tooth sharks like to go, which is Quarter Reef in nearby Setswana Bay. It is a scuba diving restricted zone. And 40 kilometers further from that, there is the Reggae Reef within the Eastern Mongoliso offshore wildlife zone, which means it is like a sanctuary. There is no diving, no boats, and nothing there is allowed, no humans, which is really good because I could use Reggae Reef as like a control site because there was only research access for boats with permits. And then Quarter Reef is close to where the boats launch, and it has a high diver activity. And this brings us again to the research question: how does human marine activity influence shark abundance? And I had 2 hypotheses. One was that Reggae Reef exhibits consistently higher shark abundance and peak aggregation compared to Quarter Reef, and that the code of conduct violations and higher diver pressure at Quarter are associated with lower shark abundance and reduced aggregations. And talking about the methodology, as already said, I was comparing 2 sites, one with no human pressures and one with lots of live activity. And for both sites, we had fixed GoPro cameras, remote underwater videos, that we put near the shark resting areas.
and it would take pictures every 30 seconds from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., which would generate around 1,700 images. And these would be sorted out, and we would look for the maximum number of sharks within a frame for the whole day. And for quarter mile reef only, we would also collect diver data, which would have group size, exposure time, and code of conduct. And for the code of conduct, it would be independent from the shark presence. It would be looking at the distance of the diver towards this remote underwater video station and its distance to the resting site. And then I also used some long-term remote underwater video data from the last years from published studies and shark life reports. So I was looking at the long-term patterns of the of quarter mile reef and irregular reef. Quarter mile reef is in blue. It's from 2019 to 2023. And irregular reef is in orange. So we can see that there is a consistently higher mean max of reggae-toothed sharks at reggae reef. So there's always more sharks there. And there's a strong interannual variability at both reefs. It's not always the same mean max. And this difference is persistent across the comparable season. And there's no long-time declining trend visible. So we can see on this that the reggae reef would function as the primary aggregation site. And comparing the daily data from season 2024 and season 2025, which is the pictures that were sorted out every day from the 1,700 with the max N, would show that there is a clear summer peak around December and February, and it would be much stronger at reggae reef. And then we can see there is low aggregation at in season 2025. There's a lot less abundance of sharks, but still at reggae reef there is a higher abundance. And this makes sense because it matches the biannual reproductive cycle. Comparing the direct reef, I used a scatter plot, and this would be only on days with simultaneous sampling. So on the x-axis, we can see the shark abundance at reggae reef, and then on the y-axis, at the same day, the abundance at quarter mile reef. And we can see that, again, reggae reef had a significantly higher max N than quarter mile reefs. And with the Wilcoxon test, it was under 0.01. And we can see on some days that reggae reef had over 50 sharks, while quarter mile had less than 10 sharks. So the differences are robust and consistent. And then looking at the code of conduct and the shark presence, I used a box plot, and the proportion of the followed versus violated code of conduct dates per aggregation category. And shark absence occurred when the code of conduct was violated, and there was a higher aggregation when the code of conduct was followed, which could suggest short-term and local displacement or reduced detectability. So we can see on this data that the code of conduct and the following does have an effect on the shark potentially. And in my discussion, I compared it with other studies. In Australia, there's a lot of research on brainer sharks. And there's this, when the divers are closer approaching and crowding, there is a temporary displacement and an increased movement. So there is a reduced resting behavior. And in those papers, it's also, the effects are meant to be usually short-term, but they could accumulate at high use sites. And this is what I could see at in Sotwana Bay. It shows similar short-term signals. But as there are different tourism patterns, it limits the direct comparison. So I had a lot of limitations. my sample size was really, really small. I only had 11 days for March about the diver data and 6 days for December 2024, and only short-term snapshots. So the diver behavior was recorded over limited time windows. I have no long-term capture, no long-term quantitative tourism effort data. No, the max N is a very limit because I have a very conservative abundance index, and it does not capture any residence or fine scale behavior. So it is we're talking about the inference, it's only an observational study. So associations can be observed, but this does not mean that there's any causation, and the results are more indicative and there can be no conclusions taken from that. Not really. So what we can see is that it is important to have this sanctuary protection, and that code of conduct compliance is critical. When I was looking at the dive presence and the dive exposure, it was not conclusive because logically there are more divers when there are more sharks and they will stay longer. So that could not tell me something about that. But peak tourism coincides with peak aggregation in the way that there are more divers in the seasons where there are more ragged-toothed sharks. And so it is important that strong enforcement during this peak seasons is needed, that they follow the code of conduct. And what was primarily we can say is that when we have the two sides, the shark aggregation is really mostly driven by their life history, their reproductive cycle. They return to their reggie reef, as this is a preferred site, and they have the strong site fidelity. And human activity does not override those natural drivers, but it can influence the local space and the detectability. And that's why it's important that protected reefs remain, and regulate tourism can coexist with conservation. So, thank you.
Start with you, Steve, as we ended with you last time.
Yeah. I was wondering, well, at some point you show graphs that show the abundance of shark over time, like from 2020 to 2024, something like that. Yeah, that one. So, who has collected those data? Where do they come from?
These are from the papers and reports from SharkLife and published studies that were conducted with SharkLife. And they just had the mean max N within the data, and this was it was very limited, sadly.
I'm just wondering because you have like very low abundance, for example, in 2021, which is COVID period with not many divers going there. So, is it because the sampling effort was lower during those years, or is it just there were less shark and then that would show that maybe divers don't matter much?
It would, so these are remote underwater videos, so that has nothing to do with the divers in the way that the sampling effort is done via pictures. That could be a hypothesis that they are not influenced by divers, but it also depends on how much that COVID really had an effect in South Africa on the dive community.
I didn't catch, maybe you told it, but what was the number of samples, sampling, the number of camera?
So it was only one fixed
You're not link also to this, to the question from Steve to see if this is bias, and also you reported the maximal number here in the same graph, but without error bars. So you say the high variability, but when you were talking, but which is this variability? Are there significantly different this data or?
Sorry, which graph?
The same that Steve was, it's the maximum number of sharks.
I do not have that. I apologize. I only extracted these from the papers.
Okay, this is
So these are from the Shark Life reports and published studies that Shark Life assisted to, which is when they use the same setup that I used. And what they do is basically we have the fixed underwater video and nearby a resting area, and then we have like from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. these 30-second images, so it's like almost 2,000. And then we go through these 2,000 pictures, and then in one day, the highest number of sharks, which is identified as a reggae-tooth shark, is.
But then do you do this on a very regular base, or every day, every 2 days?
So this is like fixed. They're like underwater, and they take it every day.
Yeah, every day. And so you can calculate a mean value of this maximum.
Yes, but for the published studies, so this is why I have one for 2019 to 2023, and then I have these seasonal dynamics for 2023 to 2025, because for these I had the access to the daily numbers, which were taken. But for this, I only had access to the mean max of the daily numbers. So it was very, very limited data.
And
so this is.
So in the second, for a future analysis, as a suggestion for the people that will go on with your work, you could suggest to eventually calculate an error quantification.
Yes.
Maybe all this data could not be significant.
Yes, it is not significant.
Okay, so you did the analysis.
Yeah, I did the analysis, and the problem is that, again, I am working with very limited data, so that was something that I could not, nothing was significant because it was so limited. And that is because I did not have the access for the daily means, and maybe I would have been able to get more conclusive results if I would have had that. But sadly, it was really very limited numbers, and I had until 2016, but even then it was only for one site, so I couldn't use that data. So I was sorting out a lot of data of what I can even use and what not. And then it was really.
It would have been interesting anyway to say the trend for one site, so to see this variation, and also to see the standard deviation or standard error, to see if it's bigger than the mean. You could do some. And of course, we always do with the data we have. And another question, I mean, it's not really a question, but it's true that I'm really always very curious about the host institutions where they work. So could you very shortly tell us a little bit more about the host institution and what they usually do, and what was your, I mean, the environment you were able.
So I was there for 4 months at Shark Life Marine Conservation. They have been there for over 20 years, and they actually have been doing actual research since 7 years. It was just like 2 people who were like, yeah, we should try to convince people to not kill sharks because they're really passionate divers. And it kind of grew and grew more to be, first they had their field station with a boat, and they try to talk and communicate more with park authorities. And it grew more and more, so that they started helping with research for other institutions, because something that is a problem in South Africa is that they need to have the means to do research, which is you need a boat, you need the equipment, you need someone who drives you there and to launch the boat. So that's something they started with, and then they started to have their own remote underwater videos. They started to do their own baited remote underwater videos. And they are starting a project with acoustic telemetry right now. And they're collecting a lot of data, which they can then use to talk to the authorities. I didn't have the access to all the data in detail, which would have probably improved my results. What I did there, I was sorting out all the pictures. I was doing fish ID dives. I helped out with the other research institution with just giving them when they go diving. I'm not allowed to go into the water because I would have an influence on that. So I would help with giving the cameras. I would go on patrol with them when they would check that they're going to within MPAs with boats when they're when it's a protected area. So I would help out daily, but I did not receive access to a lot of data, which I was collecting or working with or analyzing. So there was a little bit of a sad ending that they did not reply to some of my mails. But yeah, work with what I have.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question. You probably said it, but I completely missed it. How did you assess, or was the code of conduct assessed of the divers?
So I'm afraid of that answer because in this way it is independent from the sharks. It was focused on the distance towards the remote underwater video and the resting site. So we would check at the distance between the divers seen in these images and to the resting site.
Which means, so if you saw on the same image a diver and a shark, it suggested that the code of conduct was broken.
No, could still see the difference, like the distance between it would really focus on the distance between the diver and, in this case, the resting site seen within the remote underwater video.
Okay, so I think it's you did a very sort of critical analysis of your study. I think that's very important to have a critical eye on the data and to what it can be significant or not. What I think is interesting, and coming back to Louisa's question and what you said, that the goal would be of Shark Life that they talk with the authorities. So if you have if this would be significant data, what would you do to convince the authorities to do something? What would it be, and how would you implement it or suggest to implement it?
Well, if I would have significant data, it would be nice to show that, again, not following the code of conduct and that this dive site has a big effect on this would be first, something that is a problem right now is that we have this offshore wildlife zone, but there are still always boats going there and there are no repercussions of those for those people. Like, they take pictures of them right now and then they tell them like, yeah, this boat went there in this offshore wildlife zone, which is closed off, and then nothing happens. So something that could change is that they would have actual repercussions, like big fines, because it does affect the sharks. And it is important for also the Sotwana Bay and the tourism that the sharks are like not affected. So that's something that they could really change or try to work on, that they have actual repercussions when they go within this MPA.
But at the same time, they go there because it brings money. So for the economy and the government might be more interesting that they let the boats go there because it brings money. So that's I think the tricky part. That's why I was asking, how do you think you can implement? Suggesting to find the boats is one thing, but how do you convince it that it's really important that they find the boats?
Well, that would be, again, trying to focus, because, again, there are not that many boats there. It's just a few. So right now, the main income when focusing on a few boats and a lot of tourism is that the divers are like really drawn into because of the sharks. So that would be something with the focus on.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for this talk. So now you have this expertise on your project. And so what is your working hypothesis when you started the project? What is your working hypothesis?
Well, at the beginning, it was really looking at the behavior of the sharks and the aggregation pattern. But as we already saw in my data, it is mostly the max N. So this is more abundant. And I would have liked to actually have some data on the aggregation patterns in the way that I would have needed
But can you redefine, I think I missed something, so can you redefine for me the abundance? What do you mean between abundance versus the aggregation pattern?
So abundance is something that I could test statistically. It's the number of sharks within a frame, or just in general, the number of sharks. An aggregation pattern is in the spatial context, how close the sharks are towards each other in the resting site, which is something that can be affected short term by divers, while the abundance may not be affected by that. So we have a resting site and they're all close together, and then there's divers, and then they will spread, for example, or they will not be visible. This is something that I wanted.
Okay, and then so can you conclude on this? So you really wanted to see that. So, and what today your data give you?
Well, in significance, it gives me not any conclusive data.
Okay, so what do you need to strange your data? Is it a methodological issue, or is it more, you need more data to conclude?
You need more data. I need more actual data, because mine was very limited, very small. There were like a lot of details missing.
Do you think that your readouts are correct to answer this question?
Sorry, what?
Do you think that what you are looking at is the correct way to answer your working hypothesis?
I think there's a lot of other additional data that I would need to really be able to answer that question. Like,
okay, so yeah,
more than just
what do you know?
well, I would have needed maybe actual videos where I can see the movement of the sharks, and also what would have been useful would be the actual location of like more locations, just like not this one resting site within this area. So
okay, thank you. And just a curiosity question, you have a limitation slide, and you had a team picture on this limitation slide. So does that mean something?
that was just something we were like, yeah, I was like, where do I put this picture? It's basically just the few days we were looking at.
Okay.
And that's what my work looked like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can have a couple of questions from Ocean.
I just have a question. You mentioned at one point that when there were a lot of divers, that indicated like there was an absence of sharks. I was just wondering, do you know that because like the sharks were there before and then you see the divers come and then they're gone? Or was it just that the sharks weren't there and maybe they like heard the boats coming, or I don't know, what do you think?
So first of all, like it's on remote underwater videos. So if it's not within the frame, there is no shark visible, but it also cannot be seen that there is no shark. That's not the same. But that's already something mentioned, that there's like this short-term effect. So they will be less detectable when there is noise and bubbles and divers. So there is a possible correlation there.
Last question for you here in the public. I think we're all good. Thank you. Here we go for you, Ocean. We'll finish this session with you, Ocean. Use this as an opportunity to correct myself. I say that Guillaume Leport was part of your reviewers, with Guillaume Chandelier postdoc on marine mammals and large vertebrates. I think that's probably that.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about sharks this morning, and maybe your opinion before these presentations was that they're big, scary creatures. Maybe it still is, and you wouldn't be alone. I mean, 2025 marks 50 years since Jaws first came out, and this movie really showed sharks as scary, aggressive creatures, and they're out to get us, they're out to eat us. But what if we flip the script? What if we looked at the impact that we are having on the sharks? Hi, my name is Ocean, and with Cozumel Ocean Research, supervised by Nestoria, I conducted a study to look at the impact of tourist behavior on shark and ray behavior.
So shark diving is a growing and increasingly well-established industry that emphasizes the economic value of sharks as non-extractive resources. It includes interacting or viewing sharks while snorkeling, from a boat, or while diving. And the growing evidence of these economic benefits have led people to think that sharks are worth more alive for tourism than dead on the fish market, becoming a contemporary argument for shark conservation. Mexico is the second country in the world in terms of mammal rank diversity, and there's an estimated 85 species present in the Mexican Caribbean. However, sharks are also very present in Mexican fisheries. In fact, they're fished for their meat, their liver, their oil, their fins, and most stocks are completely overexploited. To try and combat this, the Mexican government has put into place seasonal fishing bans during reproductive seasons, and a range of ecotourism activities have appeared. The Yucatan Peninsula is a very touristic hotspot. Known as the Mexican Caribbean Tourism Corridor, it includes large urban areas like Cancun, Tulum, Holbox, Cozumel, and they generate billions in annual revenues, being central to the region's economic development. The shark ecotourism activities in this area mainly focus on bull sharks, whale sharks, and manta rays. And they are currently generating more than half of the annual revenue of national shark fisheries. However, they lack adequate management strategies. There's only a limited understanding of the potential negative effects that these activities are having, and science continues to identify both pros and cons. Therefore, it's important to evaluate the sustainability of these activities. However, this area, despite the rapidly growing tourism, has not been studied. And this leads me to my research question. What is the impact of tourist behavior during marine ecotourism activities on shark and ray behavior in the northern Mexican Caribbean? So to analyze this, 3 focal species and their respective ecotourism activities were studied. The first ones are bull sharks, Cascharinus leucas, both feeding and observation dives. The second one, white-spotted eagle rays, Aetobatus narinari, aggregation dives. And the third, nurse shark, Dingyomostoma ciliatum, dives in an MPA. All 3 of these species are considered vulnerable or endangered on the IUCN Red List, and the Mexican Caribbean is an important habitat for all of them. So for example, bull sharks are known to use Playa del Carmen as a gestational ground. White-spotted eagle rays aggregate seasonally in Cozumel, and nurse sharks are commonly found in the Cozumel MPA. And Cozumel is actually being investigated as a potential nursery area for both white-spotted eagle rays and nurse sharks. From these 3 species, there were 3 hypotheses to my question. So the first one is that animal responses will vary with the nature of human behavior. The second is that behavior will be species-specific. And the third is that there will be a degree of habituation to human presence. So although the data was analyzed under a shared research framework, due to the nature of the species and the ecotourism activity, it was collected separately. For bull sharks, the study site was Shark Point, 100 meters off the coast at Playa del Carmen, and at a depth of about 25 meters. Shark diving, shark feeding, has actually been going on there since 1998, and it's been designated as a polygon for shark diving in the Mexican Caribbean Biosphere Reserve. What's especially interesting about this site is, as I mentioned previously, is that it's a gestational ground. So all the bull sharks that come are females, and most of them are pregnant. For white-spotted eagle rays and nurse sharks, both were investigated in Cozumel. Cozumel is the largest island in Mexico, and it's found 16 kilometers off of the Yucatan Peninsula. It's a very popular spot for diving because of its high marine biodiversity. And the waters are mainly protected by the MPA, Parque Nacional de Arrecifes de Cozumel, which I will call PNAC from now on. The dives for nurse sharks occurred within the PNAC that has over 50 sites. However, notably, the dives for white-spotted eagle rays occurred in Cantarell, which we can see towards the north, and that is outside MPA boundaries. This site is an advanced diver site due to the strong current conditions, which is also what is thought to attract the eagle rays to this specific site. However, the actual ecological reason for this aggregation is unknown. The data was collected by attending the dives and filming them. So for bull sharks, this included 7 feeding dives and 3 observation dives during the winter season of 2024 to 2025. And video was collected by myself, as well as by a professional videographer who sent in videos for analysis. White-spotted eagle rays 14 aggregation dives were attended between the months of March to April 2025, and information was collected by myself, the researcher.
And lastly, for nurse sharks, there were hundreds of dives that were carried out within the PNAC between April to June 2025. And information was collected by myself, the researcher, but also through citizen science. More specifically, Cozumel Ocean Research volunteers were trained and briefed on the project, and they would send in video information of encounters that they had with nurse sharks during their dives. The data was analyzed, the data was grouped as a way to analyze and compare the different species. Specifically, human behavior was used as a predictor, and shark and ray behavior was used as the response variable. So human behavior was categorized with the behavioral coding scheme through the observed behaviors. So here are a range of them. However, on the other hand, shark and ray behavior was grouped into 5 broader behavioral categories that went from neutral tolerance to different degrees of avoidance, to antagonistic defensive, and all the way to overhabituation, which basically means that the sharks showed that they were accustomed to human presence. So the data was analyzed separately, again, because of the differences. It's important to note that actually, although that not all these behaviors were seen during all the shark dives, so neither for humans, neither for sharks, not all behaviors were present at the same time. So let's look at the results. Firstly, for bull sharks, the frequency counts are visualized in a chord diagram over here. At the bottom, we have human behavior, and at the top, we have bull shark behavior. If we pick, for example, the behavior that's seen the most on humans, that'll be human presence over here in dark yellow. And if we follow the line, we can see that it leads to neutral tolerant behavior and also a lot to overhabituation. Interestingly, some antagonistic defensive behavior was also seen from bull sharks. And this was when humans stimulated the Lorenzini ampullae or touched the sharks. So to answer the question, if human behavior at shark point impacts bull shark behavior, a Fisher test and a chi-square test were conducted, and they both revealed a significant difference. Kramer's V was also looked at, which looks at the strength of the relationship between the 2 categorical variables in the chi-square, and it revealed a result of 0.48, which is moderately strong. For white-spotted eagle rays, if we look at when divers followed guidelines, this led mostly to neutral tolerant behavior, as well as to some overhabituation. However, also when divers approached the individual, this still led to neutral tolerant behavior. Still, more invasive actions like harassing eventually did lead to some sort of avoidance. But we can see that there is much less avoidance over here than for the bull sharks, for example. So to see if human behavior at Cantarell impacts eagle ray behavior, again, a chi-square and Fisher tests were conducted. However, this time they did not reveal a statistical significance. Nonetheless, Kramer's V was still analyzed and it gave a result of 0.44, so again, moderately strong. Lastly, for the nurse sharks, we can see that once again, when divers followed guidelines, it resulted in neutral tolerant behavior as well as in overhabituation. However, when harassment occurs, this led to active avoidance, but still to neutral tolerant behavior. So to see if human behavior in the PNAC influences nurse shark behavior, a Fisher test and chi-square tests were conducted, giving a statistically significant relationship, and a Kramer's V of 0.51, which indicates quite a strong relationship. So the results demonstrate that shark and ray responses do vary with the nature of human behavior, and a clear pattern emerges. More specifically, there is a tolerance towards non-invasive human behavior. The compliance with diver guidelines was linked to neutral tolerant responses, which indicates that existing guidelines can actually help mitigate behavioral disturbances. On the other side, there were evasive reactions to invasive actions. These behavioral trends align with the literature established in Laszlo Brank's stress ecology, where avoidance or withdrawal is an expression of disturbance. But let's look at some more species-specific patterns. So bull sharks were actually the only species who showed an antagonistic or defensive response. Specifically, this was the lowering of both pectoral fins, also known as a bispectoral fin depression. In literature, this is quite well established as a sign of aggression. However, when analyzing the videos, we noted that in this specific case, the movement was immediately followed by withdrawal rather than continued aggression. And there's a paper by Ritter which states that single species groups of sharks that have become accustomed to being fed, like the bull sharks at Shark Point, rarely, if ever, display any antagonistic behavior. Therefore, it is possible that this was actually a preparatory escape maneuver and it signaled that the shark was under stress rather than an indication of aggression. So the behavior in this context may actually be more consistent with avoidance rather than aggression. And therefore, it is important and interesting to see that certain behaviors which have been well established in literature in an anthropogenic context could actually have a different meaning. For nurse sharks, what was interesting is that they responded to intrusive behavior commonly by shifting their position rather than by, well, leaving and withdrawing. And this low intensity response suggests that there's a tendency towards learned behavioral adjustment. And what that basically means is that they've become used to humans bothering them. Although on one hand, this is good because it can reduce acute stress responses, it can also dampen anti-predator behavior, and it can lead the sharks to be more exposed to human impacts in the future. Therefore, this could be a conservation concern in the long term. For white-spotted eagle rays, it's important to say that the fact that there was no statistical significance doesn't actually mean that there was no human impact. If we look at the actual data and the numbers, we can see that when there was harassment behavior on behalf of humans, the eagle rays did withdraw and did show some avoidance behavior. However, the fact that it was not statistically significant is probably actually due to the lack of observable behavior. Basically, the current at Cantarell is so strong that humans can't actually go close to the eagle rays, even if they wanted to, because the current would just take them away. However, opportunistic observations in the NAC, where eagle rays are sometimes observed, show that they do show withdrawal behavior when humans actually can approach them. And this is more consistent with the broader literature for this genus. So given the ecological function of the aggregation at Cantarell is unknown, we suggest for there to be precautionary management. So for example, conduct carrying capacity studies, which could actually inform how many divers should go into the aggregation dives at a time. Lastly, an interesting pattern that emerged was not from the species studied, but the species that were not seen. So although it wasn't formally part of this study, broad surveys were conducted by the NGO Cozumel Ocean Research, and they revealed the presence of Caribbean reef shark, Castrinus perezi, and the great hammerhead, Sirina mocra. However, we can see that there's been a broad-scale displacement of these sensitive species because these species are rarely, if ever, observed during dives. So their behavioral absence suggests that they have a different tolerance. And although the PNAC rotates bi-monthly dive site closures, this may not be enough and only have limited benefits as it is not leading to the repopulation of these areas by these sensitive species. Therefore, it is important to understand the threshold at which human disturbance becomes disruptive. Some limitations of the study include that it was a first systematic investigation on shark and ray behavior in the area, so there was nothing local to compare my results to. In addition, there was a small and uneven sampling effort. For example, there was a lot more information for bull sharks than for eagle rays or for nurse sharks. Also, the observational design is limited by a lack of control. This means that I could establish an association between human and shark behavior, but not a cause and effect relationship. And lastly, this study did not investigate the socio-psychological characteristics of divers and guides, meaning that we didn't really ask the divers how they felt about sharks, their attitudes and their beliefs towards them before they went in the water. And that could have impacted the human behavior and in turn the shark behavior. But before I go on to my conclusions, I want to ask you a question. Are we killing them with kindness? Shark diving is really presented as this alternative to fishing, and we're saving them because we're not killing them. But does that really mean we're helping them? Well, my personal answer to this question is not really. It's important to note that this study doesn't indicate that shark diving is inherently detrimental. It shows that regulations work. It's important to follow them, and when they're implemented and relevant, they help minimize disturbance. However, although they follow a similar pattern, responses seem to be quite species-specific. So it's important to conduct studies to have very species and site-specific guidelines, as broad or uniform regulations are unlikely to be effective. Lastly, there is a need for long-term interdisciplinary research to look into the socioeconomic aspects and ecological and physiological dimensions, so that we can ask for science to guide how humans interact with wildlife. Thank you.
Do a mix. We'll start with you, Eric, and go with Lisa.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I think I will ask a question about one of your last points about the species-specific responses, that you don't think that this may lead to a broad regulation. even if there's species-specific responses, in all of the cases, you have a clear response to harassment.
Yes.
So this goes towards, you can clearly say, don't harass any species you see underwater, right?
So, well, my response to that would be, in this study, the only site that had very specific regulations was the one for bull sharks. It's quite a long history and quite well developed, and they have very specific regulations. However, Cantarell, as I mentioned, is outside MTA boundaries. There's nothing really that indicates, except the dive guides suggest, don't try and follow the eagle rays. And the nurse shark, there are some guidelines, and that's for the PNAC in general. It's not specific to the nurse sharks. And of course, these help. These help and they minimize disturbance, but they're not always followed that well. And so having behaviors or guidelines that are more specific, I think something that I mentioned in my report a lot is I think it'd be really interesting to conduct carrying capacity studies. That hasn't been done at any site. And for example, just having that would already inform. So it's a bit more site and species specific, but of course, broad regulations are still helpful. It's still better than nothing.
Okay. You answered the question about the eagle rays that's sort of less easy to harass about the currents. That's fine. I also had a question, and then I will come back to another one person. You used the shark feeding and see how they behave. I had a broader question. If shark feeding is started somewhere, does that change the location of the natural aggregation?
So
Because that's a huge impact.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, we're going to go very quickly into the history of shark diving at Shark Point. So we're actually able to interview the man who first started shark diving there, which was extremely interesting. And he told us that basically he could see that bull sharks were there because, again, this isn't coming from scientific literature. This is just stories that are kind of passed down. But they say that Playa del Carmen actually used to be the nursery area. And there were mangroves. However, this was basically destroyed due to the urban center being built. And now there's reports of the pups being born a little bit further down near the border with Belize. So it's not too far down. But the bull sharks would still come. And so that's why it's still a gestational ground. And this guy basically saw that the bull sharks were there and he wanted to feed them. So he started spearfishing underwater. And he would then hide behind a rock and wait for the sharks to come. Eventually, this activity began to be commercialized. And other people would see like, oh, he's doing the dives. Maybe we can have tourists and all of that. And so he very specifically decided Shark Point as an aggregation area. The reason is that it's only 100 meters from the coast, so not a lot of fuel, which is also crazy because it's very, very, very close to swimmers. Also, he picked the depth of 25 meters very specifically because that means that on air, after 30 minutes, you have to start going up, and that puts a time on all the different interactions. At the beginning, there were multiple boats coming at a time, and it was a mess and very dangerous. Also, if you're having a shark feeding and then divers come down. So the idea was to have very specific times. So yes, it can change basically, and they did on purpose. But for them, it was helpful basically.
Thanks.
Luisa, then I Jim.
First of all, just a curiosity, maybe you told it, but maybe you didn't catch. The measures you took about both the human behavior and the shark and ray behavior were paired informations. When you collected this behavior?
So I didn't have time to go too into the presentation, but if you want to read my report, there's about 9 pages of methods and specifically how I collected behavior. So it was done separately, and that's why the results were also analyzed separately. I had a quick heat map that did inform like general trends, but there's a lot of behaviors that observed specifically during bull shark dives because of the feeding context that are not observed during nurse shark and white spotted eagle rays dives. So it was unfair, I think, to combine them. However, I observed specific behavior. So for example, circling or passive proximity to humans, there's a description of each behavior and a category that it's in. And it's all informed by published literature. So again, in my report, I have how every behavior connects to literature and why that's grouped in a certain category. So I did analyze the exact behavior. It was just easier for comparison to group it in a broader behavioral category.
So in your analysis, okay, you compare the behavior of the sharks and the human on a general.
Yeah,
wider.
Yeah.
Then, going back to Eric's question, I was interested because it's very interesting this detail you gave about the depth and then the time of interactions. And I just wanted to know on accumulate approach, how long are the sharks interacting during the day? I mean, do you have boats lining?
Okay, so again, quite different for a species, but for bull sharks, it's now become very, very, very organized, which is, I personally think that it's, in terms of feeding, it's a quite well-organized case. First, it's interesting that the sharks aren't there all year. They come when they're pregnant before going down to, well, possibly Belize. And one day the feeder will go down there with food and the shark just won't come because naturally it will have moved on. So that's very good. But during the season while they're there, yes, it is basically one boat after the other. There's a specific buoy and everyone has 30 minutes. And there's also very specific feeding times. So not all boats that do observation can do feeding. And that's also very important.
So I think there is no idea of stopping feeding.
No. I don't think so.
Business.
I don't think so at all. Yeah, I mean, I won't, not really your question, but I did quickly look at the impact of feeding and observation, and there is a statistically significant impact, especially for overhabituation. You really have the sharks going up to the diver directly. They know what he's there for. It's crazy, but I don't think they're going to stop. No.
And then my last question was about, I think it's very interesting, I would say, to try to calculate a threshold.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest to do if you had to plan a study to calculate precisely this threshold about, the number of...
Sorry. Like for the species that we don't see while diving, or just in general for...
No, in general. For example, you were studying about this equilibrium,
Yeah.
the species that, how would you calculate the threshold that would eventually make it more, and also for the species that are not.
So again, I really think carrying capacity studies would be really important. I wouldn't know how to carry them out exactly, but I know in Cozumel in the marine park, they did carry some out, but it was years and years and years ago. So they're not very relevant now, and they're also not that very well respected either. I think knowing how many people okay, I have an answer. I'm sorry, it's not really directed to your question, but we did also observe whale shark dives, whale shark snorkels. And basically, when we got there, there were a lot of boats, and the interactions were maybe like 8 seconds. And by the time we left, but everyone left because it started raining and we were the last boat, and the encounters lasted over 2 minutes. So I think something like that would be interesting. So kind of adding a number of, I don't know, maybe having 2 boats, seeing how long the encounters last, having 3 boats, seeing how long the encounters last. I understand that this may be a very long study and you wouldn't be able to close the whole marine park to try and understand if the hammerhead is annoyed or not. So that's also hard. But yeah, I think maybe that.
Okay, let's go to Adeline and we'll finish with you.
So, yeah, except feeding, you mentioned. So, from your point of view and expertise now, which human behavior can attract these different species in a friendly mood? Meaning that, okay, what will you do now in terms of conservation and protection? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So is there any species you want me to answer to, or just...
Just up to you.
Okay, so for bull sharks, in observation, it is very different. They keep a distance. You can see that their behavior is more naturally, it's more aligned with natural behavior found in literature. So I think minimizing feeding a bit would be ideal. As I was saying to Lisa, I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon. But having also, for example, feeding could be conducted, but not as an ecotourism activity.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep the sharks there,
Mhm.
and you say, anyway, they pass here and we want them to stay, we can do ecotourism. Okay, you can go feed them just with the feeder, and it doesn't have to be a whole show. It can also have after the observation dives, which cause more neutral interactions between humans and sharks without the whole show of feeding, because at the end of the day, it is a show. They put on the whole armor, and I mean, you can see how the guy is dressed here. It's very intense. So I think something like that.
But for the eagle ray, the spotted ray, yeah, the eagle ray.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
So they are quite shy and fast, like you mentioned. And then, do you have any idea of any behavior, human behavior, that can also make them stay a little bit longer?
Yes, actually. So Cozumel Ocean Research specifically is very interested in eagle rays, as you can see. And they have conducted studies on trying to identify the species at Cantarell. And they know some behaviors when the human can approach and it doesn't disturb the eagle ray as much. So specifically, that is while the eagle ray is feeding or hunting and it's distracted, and basically they hunt with their nostrils kind of digging in the sand. And if you approach them from the side and calmly in that context, you can get into closer contact. I think, of course, ideally the behavior I would say is just look at them. You know, you don't need to be super close to them to be able to enjoy the species. You can just kind of look at it.
Yeah, because in all you say, I mean, it's the human that is coming closer to the animal, but the other way around. I mean, how to stimulate the curiosity of an animal, one of the species you are looking at, except feeding. Okay.
So
come to
I have a trick, but I don't know if I'm allowed to share this.
Maybe. But
there are ways, especially for nurse sharks. Also, for example, they seem to be quite interested when you have a camera, and possibly for the electronic signals. So maybe something like that, and also just staying quite tranquil. There was quite a lot of curiosity towards divers. So that was present both for eagle ray and for sharks. And it is a bit of a natural. I think it's just if the human is like, trying to get too close to them. But if you're a bit more calm, they will come towards you. It's possible. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question. I didn't really get when you present your stats and your results. What do they represent? Because you talk about a lot of interaction, a lot of data, and then you give one value. So what does it really represent?
Okay, so the core diagram was to look at generally frequency counts, just to have an idea of how many times things happen. So that was just the visual of the diagram. But then for the statistics, so for the Fisher score and the Pearson score test, I had human behavior and the different categories, shark behavior, the different categories, and it was and also counting the amount of times that they happened. So how many times, because for example, we see following guidelines can lead to multiple things at a different amount of time. And then the test was conducted on that. So basically the Fisher's test on shark behavior and human behavior. And then
you group everything because the result is more like binary distribution.
Yeah, I did group everything. And I do have standardized residuals, which I analyzed. No, sorry. Okay. I do have standardized residuals that I analyzed. I didn't repeat them because they were quite similar to the frequency counts actually, but that did allow to see what specific behavior. And it follows the same pattern. So we have, for example, for bull sharks, neutral tolerant behavior is positively more associated with human presence, whereas it's negatively associated with attempted touching. So I did go look into the more specific behaviors, but I didn't mention them too much in the presentation because they did match the frequency counts, so to avoid repetition. But I did also look at the specifics.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's open the floor for a couple of questions from you. Yes, Amy.
I was wondering how you distinguish between tolerant and over habituation.
Yeah, so that would kind of go into like the more specific behaviors. So tolerant would be, for example, if the human tries to do something, right? And the shark just continues going on its path. It's not bothered, and maybe the human tries to approach and the shark just doesn't care, and it doesn't seem to veer gradually. So I also looked at the shark behaviors based on speed of response and based on degree. So for example, if they turned over 90 degrees, that was considered more active avoidance, whereas if it was just a mild veer, that was considered mild avoidance. And over habituation is when the shark more initiates the contact. So for example, the shark directly approaching the diver, the shark looking for food. So that would be classified as over habituation.
mentioned in your introduction, like fishing. Is that also maybe an activity that you observed could impact the behavior? Like, are there other activities in the area that?
So actually, within Cozumel MPA, fishing is banned. It's not allowed. So that doesn't happen. And also for bull sharks, it's a like closed polygon. So there's no fishing either. So it wasn't really a pressure that matched in the area, thankfully. And I do think that it is because of the tourism, because of all the money that it brings in, and they don't really want to endanger that. Actually, before at the bull shark site, okay, it's weird, but there's one fisherman that is allowed. I don't really know how that works, but I know that one fisherman is allowed to go. And when they started the bull shark feeding and he knew it was there, he basically went and fished like 10 bull sharks. And so from now, they pay him yearly, the equivalent, to then not go and fish so that they can continue the activity, which is
Shark fishing.
Yeah, shark fishing.
I mean, also like fishing in general.
No,
Does that
but in their
attract
no, it's
tourism activities? No.
it's not allowed like generally. I think they had like a fishing contest that was like very specific, but fishing is usually outside the boundaries.
Okay, so very good. Congratulations. We're gonna have a long break, and we're coming back for Corina and Maxime for session 5 at 10:50. 10:50, and there is a coffee break available. When do we do this? When do we break of this length? As usual, we will nicely invite you to go to the other room for the coffee break. We need this room now.